So are you saying that the Trump family is corrupt?
Yes. Sure. I mean, it's just, it's readily apparent. I mean, when you pay your son's girlfriend 60 grand out of campaign money to give a 3-minute speech, you're using money that people donated to you. And by the way, that money was donated by people who wanted to fund him to fight the stolen election. When they donated that money, they didn't think 60 grand was going to Kimberly Guilfoyle to give a 3-minute speech. They didn't think $208,000 was going to Melania's stylist, right? So I don't know what you would call that other than corrupt.
Chris Christie continues his Speaking the Truth tour when it comes to former President Trump and his entire family's corruption while he was in office. And he zeroed in on his son-in-law, Jared Kushner.
Sending Jared Kushner to the Middle East and then having him within 6 months. And by the way, the $2 billion he got from the Saudis, up until 5 days ago, he hadn't invested any of that money. That's 2 years he hadn't invested a nickel of the money, but paid himself his management fee out of that money, which is a percentage of the $2 billion every quarter. For what? What was he managing? Make sure every once in a while pick up the phone and call the bank. Is the $2 billion still there? Yeah, good. Okay, great. But I mean, you know, so yeah, that looks like corruption to me, Steve. Yeah.
Sadly, it's a bold move for him to repeatedly point out the truth about Donald Trump's self-serving administration, mostly because the truth ends up sounding like you work for the other party, especially since Democratic Representative Moskowitz is saying things like this.
We sit here, we hear our colleagues bring up certain things like, oh, the Biden family took money from a foreign entity, right? And it's just like, well, really? I mean, do they really not know that Jared Kushner took $2 billion from the Saudis? I mean, by the way, they go on Twitter and blame the Saudis for 9/11. But then Jared Kushner, who, by the way, was not a wealth expert before he worked in the White House, nor was he a Middle East expert before he worked there, gets $2 billion from the Saudis, and they don't have any questions. You don't have any credibility when you only want to look at one side of the coin.
One side note here, though. Politicians with both a D and an R next to their names feel the need to cover their own party's questionable actions all the time. It just becomes more stark here when the House Republicans are hanging their entire agenda on Hunter Biden right after blatantly ignoring the telltale signs that the former president and his son-in-law openly took billions from the Saudis. And remember, Trump reportedly bragged about covering for the Saudi crown prince over Jamal Khashoggi's gruesome murder. Chris Christie's tactic to relentlessly expose the corruption within the Trump White House doesn't seem to be winning him the Republican nomination because, as we've witnessed, MAGA Republicans are somehow motivated to support illegal activity, violence, and corruption. Or maybe Chris Christie's just trying to get more people to pay attention to what a few others have been saying.
Kevin McCarthy tweeted, the Speaker of the House, ostensive, said the American people deserve to know that public offices are not for sale and the federal government is not being used to cover up the actions of a politically connected family.
Mohammed bin Salman, who said he wanted to give that money to Jared Kushner in addition to a $25 million a year management fee. There's been very little of that money invested. The whole thing smells like a huge payback.
Jared Kushner conned his way to a cushy White House job with no clear job description and no experience.
And remember, he covered up for bin Salman's brutal dismemberment and assassination of Jamal Khashoggi.
Now, once he was close enough to the Saudis, we have records of a $110 billion arms deal between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia that was inflated at the direction of Jared Kushner.
And Chairman Comer, he said he agrees with us that Kushner crossed a line of ethics. And if that's true, then he should go ahead and render a subpoena.
Now, in the exact words of Republican Chris Christie, who I'll quote, "The grift from this family is breathtaking."